What up, what up? Good morning, people.
This is the Vagina Broadcast Show. Timpin Salone.
What's going on, Brother Jabisky?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
Can't complain, just blessed to be in the presence of the greatness. So we always like to keep it fresh and new on the Timpin Salone broadcast platform. And today we're introducing a new segment called The Crossover. The crossover will be a short segment that we're crossing over into the sports, similar how AI did over Ty Lue, touching on a variety of sports and different things in the sports world. And our first topic today is the Super Bowl. What were your thoughts on the game?
I thought that game, it was the Eagles. They handled the Chiefs. It was a crazy game. I thought it would be a close game, but the Eagles really handled their business. I wasn't sure with that first, especially that first quarter with those penalties. I was like, what's going to go on here? And then right when the Eagles they scored, like, okay, we got something. And then when they had the pick six and then the back-to-back turnovers, it really just dominated. I was like, okay, we probably going to get a blowout. But I still was thinking, even though they were up, I think it was like 24-0 at halftime, the Chiefs still had a chance. So I was like, okay, it's not over yet. But then when it was like 34-0, I was like, okay, this game's over. So, yeah, I thought the Eagles really dominated the Chiefs, and they really just really just had a great game themselves.
Yeah, whoever wins the turnover battle usually are the ones that win the game. And I think that, I ain't going to lie to you, right when the third quarter, when they were up, that's when I kind of just caught some Z's and kind of fell asleep. But happy for the Eagles and just, getting a championship. I'm all for players just, getting their first championship just to cement their name in history. But there were a lot of different extracurricular activities going on, during the Super Bowl. Did you get a chance to check it out?
I think I saw part of it. I guess what specifically are you talking about?
Talking about the halftime show, player.
Oh yeah. I thought the halftime show was very good. I was especially happy with when they chose Kendrick to be the halftime performance. So yeah, I was definitely looking forward to it. And then when I saw the performance, as soon as I saw Samuel L. Jackson, I was like, okay, we're about to have something different here. So I was really excited for that, and just seeing how the whole thing played. I really liked the. So I think before Kendrick Lamar was basically saying this whole thing is going to be like a storyline or like a story played throughout. So I really like how he had the balance of having Samuel L. Jackson as Uncle Sam, and then just having the different types of performance. I think there was definitely a lot of symbolism, a lot of different meanings behind what he was doing. But I think it's definitely one that we'll always remember. I think it's always nice when you have something that stands out and something that's different, because you don't want to see the same thing year after year. So I think I really like how Kendrick really switched things up and mainly focused on his current music. Because a lot of times with the Super Bowl, you have a lot of artists out there just go through time and just have their biggest hits. But I think Kendrick did a good job of giving some of those hits, but also some of his present day hits, of making it more a part of the times and really just connecting with the audience through that way. What did you think?
Watching people getting bullied on Fox News. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm surprised the NFL didn't have certain restrictions on the performance. I'm all for creative expression and creative creativity, but I think that it's definitely an interesting performance, to say the least. But I think that I try to stay out the way in kind of peace and tranquility. I think that considering the level of endurance necessary to kind of rap for that long, I definitely got to give my kudos to all the performers and just people involved, because it takes a lot of skill and art to kind of just continuously rap. And I know sometimes people lip sync, but it's just continuing just that art and the aspect of just, that level of dedication. Do you think that the NFL will become a platform where people, how the best way I can say that? Do you think the NFL was wrong for not censoring the performance?
Just the overall performance, or a specific segment, or specific song?
A specific segment. Like us record.
Yeah, I don't think it was wrong. I get the song just won 5 Grammys. I think the song, it transformed and it transcended the time it came out, with the back and forth between Kendrick and Drake. It really became just a phenomenon, like one of the biggest hits, not only of the year, but probably so far this decade. So I think it kind of transcended when it originally came out, what it was. So I don't think they were wrong for that. So I think overall, it's a good song. It's a song that everybody can really get into. It's a song that everybody was looking forward to hearing. So I think as long as it was the NFL was okay with it, I think that's all that really mattered.
I mean, yeah, touche. I think that there's always a line between creative expression and just, the extracurricular activities. But, I think that, overall, I think it kind of showed the level of, skill and expertise needed to perform a show like that, just from running around the field and just knowing where the different camera angles are. So I think that definitely one to remember, to say the least. I'll say that.
Yeah, it was definitely visually appealing, just seeing everybody in the red, white, and blue, and that everyone was in sync. They're running around doing the different movements and how they really shaped the American flag, and how there was one point where the flag was split in the middle. So just having that different visualization of different things, I think, is something that will definitely be something to remember.
Yeah, and I think that I'm definitely going to be curious to see, given I think this performance kind of opened the doors for different type of performance in the future. So I'm definitely curious to see how the NFL, curates, their creative, music direction in sports and stuff like that. Do you think there's ever could be a situation where the music artist could be too controversial for the platform? Or do you ever think it should be a situation where like the NFL may limit, certain artists and stuff like that because of their message and dialogue?
Well, I think even just to begin with, they probably go through a long vetting process of who they want to have on for the halftime show. I think it really just depends on who that person is and just what they represent and what they're looking to bring to the show. So I think once they go through the vetting process, and I think it's with either the city and with Rock Nation, who helps make the halftime show come to life. So I think as long as they go through that vetting process, I think if they're cleared for that, I think that's what really matters there. So there's been a lot going on this February in the sports world. We had a big trade happen at the beginning of the month, something that I don't think anybody ever saw coming. This was with the Luka and AD trade, where Anthony Davis was traded to the Mavericks and Luka-Doncic was part of that trade, so he's now with the Lakers. So that was something, like I said, that nobody really ever saw coming, something that I think really changed the landscape of the NBA. So as we get into this topic, I would ask you, Q, what were your thoughts on this whole trade?
Definitely surprising, to say the least. I think it represents a new era of basketball. I think we had like kind of player empowerment, kind of load management era when it comes to, the NBA. But I think now, I may title this era owners empowerment. And I think we talked about this on previous episodes of how the different load management and how certain players, not all, kind of take advantage of the system, I think are going to issue in a new regime. But I think that this trade signifies the win now era. People are not trying to wait until 10 to 15 years to rebuild, depending on the organization. But I think that it just signifies that the NBA is a business. I think that the bottom line is championships. And I think that if you're not producing, regardless if you have a good year or top of the league, if you're not bringing in championships, you're expendable. How about yourself?
Yeah, I was just shocked and surprised by the trade, especially with it being right at the end of the trade deadline, towards like the later half of the season. I feel like with a trade with this magnitude, you probably want to wait in the offseason, because I think both teams before the trade, you kind of would want to see where you're at, especially with the Mavericks. They just with Luka, they just went to the finals last year, so I think that's just surprising in itself, because he's only 25 years old. You could say he's just getting started into his prime. So it's something like this you never really see coming. But I don't know what the Mavs were thinking, because I think they really had people like Luka. They never really they're not in the draft every year. They're not someone that you can just all of a sudden get. He's a person that can be your rocket, your franchise, like for basically their whole career. So I think if they don't request a trade themselves, I don't think you do like a big trade, especially in the middle of the season. I think you would probably first want to see how the season goes and what your standing is at the end, and see how, if there's anything that the Mavericks were concerned about with Luka, is that something you can address with him? Is that something that can grow? Is that something that you can really develop over time? But I think, like you were saying, it might just basically just shows how the NBA really is a business, and how really trades can happen like that. I think it just really just opens your eyes to how the business of the NBA really works.
And, he's been in the league, correct me if I'm wrong, for 4 or 5 years now? I think it is.
Let's see. I think it might be 6 or 7.
Oh,
I think he got drafted in 2018.
Well, I mean, I think from just playing devil's advocate, I think the Mavs organization have known what they're kind of getting and kind of know stuff behind the scenes. And I think that if an organization is going to pivot from a marquee player, there's a lot of rumblings behind the scenes about just, conditioning and just how people, execute at a high level. But I think that, in the sports world, win now is just the motto and the mantra. Hopefully, it works out because I think that if it doesn't, I think there's going to be a lot of unhappy people in Dallas, to say the least, though. For sure.
It seems like there's a lot of unhappy people right now because I think there were people protesting right after the trade at the arena. I think because basically he was their fan favorite. He's the person they literally saw grow up with them, and they literally just went to the finals last year. It's just still crazy how you just make it to the finals the year prior. You say, okay, this is something that we can build upon. And I think with the trade, you would want to join Anthony Davis with Luka, not trade them for each other. You want to see what you can do. So it's just crazy how with a trade that magnitude, it could just go like without any notice and without any warning.
Do you think the trade is going to help interest and ratings in the NBA?
Yeah, I think definitely, especially with you have star players going to New Zealand. I think definitely this NBA trade deadline, there was a lot of trades that happened where a lot of star players went to new teams. So I think you generally are going to be curious to see how those teams are and if that can really bring them to another level, especially with the Lakers seeing Luka and LeBron pair up together, and then with the Mavericks seeing if they're trading, if that could bring them even further to even possibly win a championship. So I guess we'll see. But I think definitely seeing those new pairings, then when they eventually have to face each other, it's like definitely with that game with the Mavericks and Lakers, everybody's going to want to tune into that because I think definitely both Anthony Davis and Luka, they're probably going to want to send a personal message showing, oh, this is what you missed out on. And I guess with this team now, this is what we're going to try and do now and in the future. So I think it definitely helps boost the ratings because I think there's that natural interest to see how everything's going to work out and what the team really looks like.
Yeah, just as long as everybody can stay healthy, I think a lot of things make sense on paper as far as blockbuster trades or dynasties, but just trying to stay healthy for the all 82 is just the hard part. I think that from a fan's perspective, I think that we've kind of missed out on injuries that are naturally a part of the game. So as long as everybody kind of stays healthy, I think the league will do well. I just think that it's just listening to your body, the medical staff, the training facilities and stuff like that. But do you think that in today's era, if a player gets drafted to an organization and has been with the team for, let's say, longer than 3 seasons, do you think the owners and GM should have a conversation with the player before trading?
Yeah, I would definitely say that, especially when you ask the players to give their all to a team or organization, you want to at least give the courtesy of right before, say, hey, we're going to be trading you. And the worst thing you want is for the person to find out or through their friends or social media or seeing on like the team that they've been traded. That just really is like a very low blow and feels like, damn, I really gave my all to the organization. And then they just trade me like that without really even talking to me beforehand. So I think you definitely owe that, especially if it's the other way around. When a player requests a trade, it's all mayhem and it's all, yeah, they're causing a distraction. They're going to bring a negativity to the team. So then if a player does that, that's an issue. But then when the owner or GM, they trade you out of nowhere, and it's like, oh yeah, it's just a part of the game. So I think you owe both sides owe that level of respect. If you're asking the players to fully commit to the team, you owe it to them to really tell them beforehand, right when you're about to make the trade that's happening. Because the worst thing you want that to happen is for them just to see their friends on social media the trade, and then just all their years, their time and dedication to the team it just gets into question after that if you don't at least tell them beforehand.
See, I think that, deals, especially when it comes to trading players, they kind of happen so fast and so quick. And so I think that, we've seen from this trade that it was a cup of coffee where the transaction was being made. So I think that's a double-sided coin because I understand like the business aspect, but just from my owner's GM perspective, this is the nature of the business, here today, gone tomorrow type situation. Same with coaches. I don't know if coaches have a conversation with before they get fired and stuff like that. So I think ideally it would be nice to have a conversation, but I think that the catch 22 of that perspective is if you do have a conversation with the player and they say, hey, I don't want to be traded, kind of where do you go from there, even though you still want to be traded? So that's the only kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess ultimately the GMs, the owner, they have the power. Especially, I guess most players don't have a no trade clause. Because the no trade clause, you could they have to let you know beforehand. That's why
Right.
probably only a few players have it because that you basically have all the cards in your deck if you're able to have that. But I see what you're saying. How, like, especially with the trade, where you believe this is a piece that can really take your team to the next level. You might not be able to tell the player in time. So I think, like you were saying, ideally in the real world or in the perfect scenario, you want to have that conversation with the player beforehand. But I guess if it has to be done, I think the players, everybody, basically when you sign up, you kind of learn through it, whether it's yourself or your other teammates, how they might get traded. Just that just comes with the game and being a part of the NBA or different professional sports. So I think, like you were saying, you ideally you would want to know beforehand or want to get a heads up or warning. But if it has to be like that, I think they know what they're getting themselves into by being a part of the NBA.
And being solution oriented, how if you were, in the NBA, how would you handle kind of getting traded, or what do you think the best practice mentally kind of handle being traded is?
I think just probably just taking one day at a time because basically you're kind of all set, especially if you've been with the team for a while,
Right.
or if you just got off the team, you kind of just getting your settings in, just really just being able to establish yourself within the team. So I think probably take it a day at a time and just see. Just I think always being grateful and thankful for that you're even in the league and just remembering all the hard work you put into the game to that point. So I think as long as you're in the league and you still have the opportunity to play the game, I think you just really got to get down and back to the basics where you're playing the sport that you love and that you're just in the NBA and you're able to provide for yourself and your family. So I think you really just got to take it a day at a time to see where that new team is, trying to make it a new opportunity, trying to make some new goals for yourself and kind of refocus and recenter yourself. I think that's how I would deal if I was all of a sudden traded to a different team.
Yeah, I think that whenever you're trading, you have to understand that people see value in you and want to bring you over to this organization for, certain reasons. And unless it's like a sign and release kind of situation, but 9 times out of 10, people see value and just kind of bring you over to the organization. But we've also seen kind of with Dalton Connett, how he kind of got traded, then kind of got traded back. That's a little bit of a nuanced
Yeah.
situation there. That's, I don't know how you kind of handle that situation. But, if I was in those shoes, I think it's just understand the business aspect, understand that there's benefits to playing professionally and there's negatives that come with it. So I think it's just weighing the pros and cons, but always just keeping a professional perspective and keeping everything smooth is the best way to go. Not saying it can't be emotional behind the scenes and kind of go through just the colorful nature of sports. But I think that because we even see sometimes players kind of get in the way of their own way of just arguing about the contracts, just how they're being coached. So I think sometimes you got to be careful because you don't want to cause more of a distraction by you being traded that your value kind of decreases as far as being a cancer in the locker room.
Mhm. Yeah, and that Don Connect situation is still crazy 'cause I think it's still in the process of reviewing after the trade got declined. So I forget it's going to be some type of for more progress. 'Cause I think the trade technically might still happen, but I think they're reviewing. I think more than likely they'll probably won't go through. But yeah, it's just crazy, especially when you're a rookie, just really establishing yourself, the team being traded like that. And like you were saying too, with like the situation of when you request a trade, how to being careful with how you handle it. I think
Right.
thinking back with the Jimmy Butler situation this NBA season, right before the trade deadline, how it took a while for him to get traded, and they kept on having to suspend him, doing things like that. So I think you can really see the other side when you don't handle a trade the right way, how things can kind of just definitely go to another level where you might lower your trade value possibly depending on how you handle the situation. I think you always got to be mindful and be professional with how you treat others and how you, I guess, stick with your job. Because I think, especially if you requested a trade, you kind of want to have a swift process so you can get traded sooner. Because I think the more you might do stuff to kind of hold yourself back, you might not be able to get to the destination or place you want to go to.
Yeah, and just from my owner's perspective, I understand kind of both sides as far as the players' empowerment era and the owners kind of just establishing their perspective kind of era. But it's just like when a player comes to you and asks for a trade, if you're a GM, I don't know if you really have to listen to that player because at the end of the day, the player wants to go where it's best for the player. But you as a GM and a owner, you probably going to want to do best for the team. And I think sometimes those two perspectives are at odds. And it's also too trying to get the necessary value that you deem valuable for the players hard and stuff like that. So I think it just honestly just depends on the organization, the city, and the market. Because you look at somewhere like LA where championships, or somewhere like Boston where championships is the expectations. I think their level of conversation is going to be a little different versus you say you go somewhere like, no offense to like Charlotte or something like that, but it's just a different. It just starts at the top. I think certain owners are more business minded. They worry about the tickets. Other owners are worried about championships. So it just honestly depends on, just the organization you go to, kind of where you fall in things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And then speaking of for the players taking power back into their own hands, we see a lot of players, they might have their own medical team and own medical staff as far as handling their day to day, whether it be just lingering injuries or stuff, just keeping upkeep with just their body and how they perform on and off the court. So I guess would you say it's good for athletes to have their own medical staff?
It's always good to get a second opinion, but I think that's probably the one not talked about issue in the NBA now because I think that is causing a decline in just viewership. It's just because there's so many opinions in the pot about how you should or when a player should come back, and especially with analytics too. But I think that it's kind of a catch 22 because nobody's going to know a person's body better than the player, especially if they have like a back injury or something like that. It's hard for you to kind of really kind of critique. And it's also to the vested interest in the perspective. A team owner's doctor is going to be vested in the team, so their perspective or discretion is going to align with the team. Versus if you have a player, their perspective is going to be aligned with the kind of player. So to answer your question, I think ideally having both medical teams together and kind of all on the same page is the ideal. But I think in today's time, it's like, this medical professional is saying, you need to come back now. This medical professional is saying you got to take a couple months. So I think it's just the different medical teams and the longevity of how longer players are playing affects that. What about yourself?
Yeah, I think it's definitely good for players to have their own medical staff and team as well. You always want to have a second opinion and make sure what you're doing because you're ultimately you're the one that's out there putting your body on the line and risking whether it be a long term injury or something that could affect your career down the line. So I think, of course, you want to listen to the team doctors, but I think you always want to have that second opinion just to make sure. Because, like you were saying, with the team, they're focused on the team and seeing, okay, if they maybe could get you in a little earlier, especially if you're a team that's on the brink of making the playoffs, and maybe if you're in the game, those couple games that you could get in earlier could affect them making the playoffs or not. That could be just one example there. But I think you really just want to have your own vested interests at heart and really see, okay, this person's thinking outside of the game, outside the team, making sure that everything's 100%. Like you were saying, ultimately, you're the one that's going to be out there playing. You're the one that's going to know your body, and you're the one that's going to know, okay, I could use a couple extra days. So I think it's really important if you can to have that second opinion, that your own medical team, so they're not only looking out for you, but you're looking out for also your future.
Yeah, I think this is kind of a nuanced conversation as far as, this a player's perspective and an owner's perspective because considering I don't have the numbers here, but I'll probably say in the last 5 years, players, or maybe in the last decade, players are playing longer. That's why you're seeing certain records being broken versus in previous years. So I think players trying to prolong their career is also another reason why the ratings kind of are going down, unfortunately. But it's just my controversial opinion, or hold on, how do I say that? So let me take that. I think that on the one hand, I think that we get to see players for longer. I think that's a benefit, and I also think that's a curse too, because I think that I don't know if necessarily sports is a career that you're supposed to be doing for 10 or 15 years. So I think that helps the sport or ruins the sport, if that makes sense too.
hmm Yeah, I think depending on how your performance is, I think it helps the sport. I think LeBron James, for example, he's still you can't even really tell the difference of how he's been playing
But that's like
compared
the
to this year.
anomaly, though.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I guess yeah, you're right, but I guess still you want to probably see how long you can play. I think it's all not only physical but also just the mental side. If your mind is in the game, but I think you kind of want to see because ultimately it's like a very big transition of when you eventually end your career and decide to retire. So I think you probably want to make the most out of your career, and especially with the technology and all the doctors, as we've been saying, the medical staff. There's been new innovative things just to help with continuity and just really being able to really be able to play to your full potential and make the most out of your career. So I think we're naturally going to see as time goes by, players are going to play longer. But like you were saying, there's the anomalies of LeBron. There's some players that might not be able to play to their 40 and even beyond that. So I think it really depends on the player and just how they're able to really perform. Just kind of just, I think especially when you get to those older years, taking it year by year and seeing do you really want to continue to play and how your production is. But I think, and also there's another side to where you might be able to physically perform and you might not be as the same, but you might not be able to take that step back and take a lesser role. You might have been the star player on your team your whole career, but then because you're player, you're still able to play, but it might be a more diminished role. You might have been the first option. Now you might be a second or third option or coming off the bench. So I think there's also that side of being able to mentally still be in it and be able to perform a role that you might not have necessarily been once you enter the league or once you're in the prime of your career. So I think there's definitely different sides to that. But I think it's good to really make the most of it. But like you were saying, there is the anomalies with LeBron, and there's other players where they might not be able to get to that LeBron level as far as longevity playing 22 plus years in the league.
Yeah, and I think, sports is about rhythm and repetition and pattern and stuff like that. And you have players that come across organizations that encourage kind of load management and them to sit down and kind of not play a 82 game season. And I think that can affect a player too by him not getting his rhythm, especially if they're a rookie just coming into the league, getting those reps and those minutes. So how do you think a player should handle if he comes to an organization and says, yeah, I want to play 82 games, but I'm working for an organization that doesn't want me to play 82 games?
hmm Yeah, I think we saw that. I think I saw something about Zion Williamson. He wants to play, but I think the team doesn't want him to play back to backs. And obviously, he's had past injury history his last couple of years where he hasn't been able to play the full 82 or most of the season at times. And sometimes he might miss the season or miss a good amount of games. So I think the organization, they're trying their best, but I think at the same time, you kind of also want to think about the fans and what's best. But I think ultimately it's up to the team. And like we were saying, they're employers for the team, so they're going to have to follow with the team orders. So I think definitely as we grow older and as we really see there's like a lot of intricacies within the game and just the teams really being mindful, okay, even though this player can play 82 games, we have to look at the best interest of the team and best interest of possibly getting the most out of that player. So I think we really see just especially over the years and just with the more access we get to the game, just how much of a business it is and how really there's a lot of different things that are not just always up to the players.
Right, and I think just from a fan perspective, I think this is what's kind of leading to the decreases. Just the fan doesn't really care about the medical staff, just the load management. They just kind of want to see good quality sports game. And as you're saying, I think especially with the NIL deals, which we talked about in the previous episode, it just seems like today sports is about everything but sports. It's more about the load management. It's more about the look. It's more about looking courtside rather than you actually play on the ball and stuff like that. No diddy, but it's just kind of like let's get back to the essence of things. I think that sports is should be the goal, and I think the extracurricular activities should just be the extracurricular activities. But what do I know? So, so yeah.
And then going back to the situation with athletes having their own medical staff, say there's a situation where the organization wants you to come back early, but your medical staff says, okay, you need to wait a little bit, maybe an extra week or two. What would you do in that situation? Would you want to try and get back with the team? And I think maybe it's a situation where you're really trying to increase your standing as far as where you're seated before the playoffs, or would you take the advice of your own medical staff and really just kind of push the buttons and tell the team, okay, no, I need this extra time?
I mean, my philosophy, injuries happen through lack of preparation during the off season. So I think that there's certain strength and conditioning skills that you can do to prevent certain injuries. And that's why I think that a lot of times injuries come from, of course, there are freak, accidents and stuff like that. But I think a lot of times injuries come from lack of preparation and not taking care of your body. So to answer your question, me, if I can walk, I'm playing. I think that's kind of what the essence of sports is. It's just you giving your all, something similar like the Kobe Bryant. And I think that's what creates a beloved sports figure is just them giving their all even when they're not at 100%. Because I think that's what makes the journey that much greater. If you have a dislocated hip or a dislocated finger, but you're still playing, I think that's what makes these moments in these championships that much greater because you can say, okay, cool, he won a championship and he had a dislocated finger. There's never going to be 100% professional athlete ever. There's always going to be nicks. There's always going to be nagging injuries. So for me, if I'm getting paid, I'm playing. That's just my philosophy and my perspective. How about you?
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. I think, yeah, I agree, especially if you're able to play. But I think there's also a situation where you might hurt the team more if you're on the court, depending on how injured you are. So I think you really got to look into say, okay, if you can play, but is there a situation where you're barely able to run? and then by the time you're really getting the ball, you're trying to get somewhere. You're slowing down the game. You're hurting your team. So I think you really got to make sure. Okay, if you can play through it, like you're saying, it's always good to try and play through things. Because like you're saying, everybody's going through something. Not everybody's going to be 100%, especially as the season goes on. Everybody's going to have some bruise or some nick that's gonna it's gonna bother you, but you can really play through it. But I think you really gotta ask yourself, okay, if I do play, is it a situation where am I gonna hurt the team more than try and help it? So I think you're always gonna have that rationalization before you make that decision of playing injured. And I think there's a saying, playing. I think what is it? Playing injured versus playing hurt. I think if you're hurt, you can kind of still play through it, but if you're really injured, you might be holding your team back, and you might cost your team in the long run.
100%. Like, I mean, if you can't go, basically what you're saying, I mean, 100%, but even if you're not actually on the court, you could be on the sideline cheering on your teammates, letting them know what kind of calls you see based on if they're doing drop coverage, going over the screen. You just kind of can give that perspective. So I think even if you're not on the court, there's always ways to impact the team, and that kind of depends on your level of involvement to the team. But I think that the fans are paying their hard-earned money, so I think if you can go and you can kind of play, I think that's the perspective. And I think that I understand that the league this year is a little bit more, or just kind of in this era is a little bit more. Well, do you think the league is more physical compared to other eras, or do you think it's kind of still the same?
I think it's just different because I think we're now in like more of a shooting era where you're not gonna really have as much like that mid range post game where you're gonna have that more physicality, especially in the NBA. So I would say it's different. I think each era and each decade is probably gonna have their own style of play. So I think you're not gonna really see as much of the physicality as we did, or the same type of physicality as we did in the '90s. I think there's still physicality in the league, but I think it's just going to look different, especially with the style of play. So I think there, but I think it's just going to look different. What would you say?
I think the rule changes affect the way the game is. Moving hand checking 3 seconds in the paint, 2-3 zones. I think that affects the way the game played. So I would say I think the ball is dribbled more often compared to the 90s and eras. I think the 90s and eras, don't get me wrong, I think it's less of a position style basketball versus now where it's positionless. So I think that you see today's era of basketball, you see 1 through 5 can get a bucket. Usually before, the 5 was just a rebounder. The 4, of course, you had stretch fours and stuff like that, that would shoot the ball, but, mainly kind of just helping out the 5. The 1 was the ball handler. The 2 guard was usually your scoring guard. The 3 was kind of more in the corner, kind of shooting the ball, kind of taller than the 2 and then the 4. But I think that overall, it's just a new evolution of the game. I think that women's basketball is definitely similar to kind of the 90s era of basketball, and that's kind of where I kind of fall in my old man kind of philosophy. But I think definitely the women's basketball is definitely on the rise.
So with this trade, with Luka joining the Lakers and Anthony Davis going to the Mavericks, do you think it signifies the end of the LeBron James era with the Lakers, with him being the main focal point?
I think it represents a transition. I think every line has its day. I think it represents a transition. I think that sports is a young man's league, and I think that organizations are always looking to go younger and looking for the future. I think Mr. James has always had an illustrious career, and I think his longevity in the game is definitely remarkable. I think that as long as he's still playing at a high level, I definitely think that he earns his place and spot in the league. But I think that from the Lakers' perspective, they're looking at it from how longer can this trade run? I think that unfortunately, every train has a stop and destination. And I think that this represents just the business of basketball. And I think that's kind of like the theme of kind of just our whole kind of conversation, that there is a certain love and essence of just the fans' perspective of sports. But I think that at the end of the day, and it's a business. And I think that there's nothing wrong with transitioning on to something new. I think that that just represents just transition of a new era in basketball.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, it's definitely, I think they're looking more to the future. Because I think LeBron, he's in year 22. He's probably only got a couple years left. But I think it's something that LeBron actually would welcome, being able to pass on the reins and have someone be, I think, the number one option. So I think LeBron, I think he's still able to be a leader with the team and still able to produce and have be an all-star, all NBA player. So I think with this trade, I think it also helps LeBron. I think this might actually help LeBron play even longer than it might have been had the trade not happened, because you have a 25-year-old who's been five-time first team All NBA 5 years straight. So I think this is somebody that could really help LeBron as far as longevity wise if he wants to continue to play, especially if he's playing at this level. So I think it's also going to help the Lakers long term, so they have their players, especially if he is able to resign after his contract ends with Luka. So I think it helps both the short term and long term. Short term now, where you could possibly, with the way how LeBron is playing, the way how the rest of the team is playing, could possibly win now and still LeBron be the focal point or one of the top two options on the team. But also, I think for the long term, once LeBron does retire, if he's still ends his career with the Lakers, I think it's definitely a way to help pass the torch to the Luka era, where he's able to lead the team, and the whole team's going to mainly be focused on him and how they can get the most out of him. So I think it's something that LeBron would welcome. I think it's something that will help LeBron. I think with the trade, it helps them both now and in the future.
Do you think that when you have two max contract players, do you think that if you're a rookie, you would shy away from that organization because you probably wouldn't have a chance to develop or the spotlight would be too large?
So you're talking about, I guess, if somebody's brought into the team, or just if you're naturally drafted to the team as a rookie, how you can eventually, if you are like that star player, trying to get to be that like number one option.
Yeah, because like let's say if you're a Laker, or if you're coming into the Lakers organization with already two max high level kind of competitive players, the level of development is probably not going to be shined upon you because they're probably going to be worried about just having the max players and letting them execute as a high level. So like if you're a rookie and you have a choice, would you want to shy away from playing with two max players to have kind of have your own organization and develop like somewhere like a Charlotte or maybe Sacramento or League or I would say San Antonio, but I think that's changing with kind of just their new rising regime. So do you think that if you're a rookie, would you go to a team with kind of two max players where the spotlight's definitely not going to be on you, or an organization where you can kind of just be the only one? It's a more focused kind of just perspective.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of tough because you don't really have too much control of where you're drafted and what the situation is before you get there. But I guess you probably want to have, especially if you're one of the top picks, you probably want to be on a team where you can really are able to shine your talents and skills, so you can kind of establish yourself in the league and really pave your own way. But I do see the benefit of being on a already championship team where, yeah, as you could be that missing piece, and then eventually you become that star player. Might be a little delayed as far as being able to really show off your talent, show off your full potential. But I think there's also benefit in that. So I think it's kind of, I see both sides of just the benefits of being able to be your own, beyond having your own situation where you have your own team coming in as a rookie and be able to kind of not necessarily do whatever you want, but kind of being able to show off your full potential. But there's also the side of really being on a championship team where there's already those star players, already those max contract players where they're basically running the team. But if when you're at it, you could be that missing piece. So I think there's benefits in both, but probably most rookies, especially if they're the number one or top pick, they're probably going to want to have their own situation. But I think it also depends on what they're driven by. If they want to win and kind of have that delay at first, but then eventually take over, I could see that. So I think there's kind of benefits to both sides of that situation.
Yeah, I think it just kind of depends on your play style. I think that if you're a catch and shoot, you kind of rebound and defensive type of guy, I think you'll kind of play with any market. I think that if you necessarily need the ball to be effective and efficient, I think you would probably want to shy to, organizations where you would have the ball. Because I think that people's play style today is they're very ball dominant. I think that you see players like Steph Curry who are great at off the ball and kind of moving off the ball, but that's a skill and an art that I think that depending on which league you're looking at, if you're looking at women's basketball, EuroLeague, or NBA, kind of affect just that level of just moving without the basketball. So I definitely think it's just the player's perspective, his mentality, the reason why, and this kind of play style is going to affect where he should kind of want to play up, if that makes sense. So, so with this block pusher trade, with the Luka and the AD trade, do you think this trade signifies that nobody's safe from possibly being traded, no matter the max contract or star level ability?
Yeah, I would say they request a trade themselves, but I think it's more of a reminder. But I think there's these rare situations like the Luka and AD trade where things can kind of just switch up just like that. So I think in reality it always is nobody's safe. So I think it's just a reminder to always keep up your productivity because you never know, especially if you like the situation that you're in, you never know how things could turn out in the future. So I think overall it's just a reminder. So I think kind of to answer the question, there's kind of both. I think it is true that nobody's really safe. But I think it's also a reminder. But I think there's also players where I don't think they would ever get traded unless they request a trade for themselves, or also there's a huge drop off to where they're not the same player that they were when they were at the peak of their talent wise.
I mean, it's a business at the end of the day. I think everybody's expendable for the right price. I think that for the right draft picks and right compensation level, I think everybody's expendable. Now, of course, the asking price, for certain players are probably going to be astronomical, and logically speaking, it's probably unrealistic. But I think this trade signifies the new era of just owners empowerment and how just nobody's really safe. That goes from owners, GMs. So I guess maybe the owners safe because they own the team, but just from GMs, the coaches, and players, kind of that top down. I think it just kind of signifies that it's the business and you're not producing as far as championship, regardless if you're the top scoring leader, assist leader, rebound leader. That's nice for statistics and just, personal goals and accomplishments. But if we're not bringing in championships, then we're going to have to reevaluate top to bottom and just reevaluate. So I think that I don't think nobody's safe, just in any aspect of life. And as always, we thank you for your viewing pleasure. Once again, that's the crossover segment where we touch on everything sports and crossover like we're doing AI to Tyloo. But Trubisky, let them know where they can follow us.
Yep. So yep. Thank you again for watching. You can follow us on social media. On our Instagram page is at Vaggiato.production. Our YouTube, as you're viewing right now, is Vaggiato Production. If you want to check out our website, that's www.vaggiato.com. And those are all the ways you can stay up to date on all things Vaggiato.
Yep. And if you have any questions or topics or think there's some, topics you would like our perspective on, don't hesitate to reach out. We always try to be a resource and accessible one too. Vaggiato Day.